Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the guardian of the Speed Force. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had lost its color. That was the first thing Izuku Midoriya noticed as he trudged through the underpass, the concrete walls seeming to leach the very warmth from the late afternoon sun. The vibrant hues of hero posters, the cheerful red of a vending machine, the optimistic blue of the sky, it had all faded into a dull, monotonous gray. It was as if a filter had been placed over his eyes, one crafted from the three words that had shattered his soul. "You can't!" All Might's voice echoed in his head, a relentless drumbeat against the fragile walls of his lifelong dream. It wasn't the booming, declarative tone of the symbol of peace he'd heard on television 1,000 times. It was a quieter voice, laced with a weary pragmatism that was somehow 1,000 times more cutting. The voice of Toshinori Yagi, a gaunt, skeletal man drowning in a t-shirt far too big for his frame, steam hissing from his body like a dying machine. "It's not bad to dream, young man. But you have to be realistic." Realistic. Izuku's hands clenched into fists, the straps of his yellow backpack digging into his shoulders. For 14 years, realistic had been a cage. It was the doctor's grim pronouncement over X-rays of his two-jointed pinky toe. It was the pitying looks from his teachers. It was the explosive, contemptuous sneer of his childhood friend Kaken. It was the heartbreaking, tear-filled apology from his own mother when all he had needed her to say was, "You can." He had lived his entire life in the shadow of realism. All Might was supposed to be the one to finally pull him into the sun. He was the exception, the hero who made the impossible possible. When he'd clung to the hero's leg in a fit of desperate hope, when he'd seen the man's true, broken form on that rooftop, a part of him still believed. He had poured out his heart, the raw, bleeding story of a quirkless boy who wanted nothing more than to save people with a smile. And All Might, the pillar of his entire world, had gently but firmly dismantled it, brick by painful brick. "Without a quirk, you can't be a hero." The words were a physical weight. His feet felt like lead, each step a monumental effort. The underpass, the same one where he'd been attacked by the sludge villain not even an hour ago, felt like a tomb. The air was still and close, thick with the lingering scent of sewage and something metallic, like burned ozone. He ran a hand over his neck, the phantom sensation of suffocating slime making him shudder. He had almost died. And for what? To be told that his life, his dream, was a dead end. An explosion rocked the street ahead, a distant boom that sent a tremor through the soles of his shoes. A plume of black smoke coiled into the gray-washed sky. Normally, the sound would have been a siren's call. His legs would have already been moving, his mind racing, his notebook practically flying into his hands as he rushed to witness the clash of heroes and villains. It was an instinct honed over a decade of obsessive analysis. Today, he barely flinched. What was the point? It was a world he couldn't be a part of, just another spectacle to be observed from the sidelines, a reminder of the vast, unbridgeable chasm between him and his aspirations. He should go home. He should go home, put his charred, slime-soaked notebook in a drawer, and try to figure out what a realistic future for Izuku Midoriya looked like. A police officer, maybe? A paramedic? Good, noble professions. But the thought was ash in his mouth. They were consolation prizes. But his feet, betraying the numb despair in his heart, began to move. Slowly at first, then a little faster, they carried him not towards the quiet side street that led to his apartment, but toward the chaos. The old habits were etched too deep. The pull of heroism, even as a spectator, was an inescapable gravity. He emerged onto a bustling commercial street, now a scene of pandemonium. A crowd was pressed against a police barricade, phones held aloft, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid excitement. Beyond them, licking flames devoured the storefronts of a takoyaki stand and a bookstore. Heroes were on the scene, but they were stalled. Izuku's analytical mind, a ghost of its former enthusiastic self, began to catalog the scene out of pure reflex. Death Arms is there. Good for brute strength and rescue, but he can't get close. The villain is too fluid, and the tight alleyway limits his range of motion. Kamui Woods is trying to restrain the villain and evacuate civilians, But the fire is a major disadvantage. His wooden limbs are vulnerable. He can't risk a large-scale attack. Backdraft is working on the fire, but he's stretched thin. He's trying to contain the blaze and keep the crowd safe simultaneously. He can't focus on the villain. It was a perfect storm of bad matchups and environmental hazards. A tactical nightmare. The heroes were doing their jobs, but they were trapped in a state of strategic paralysis, able to mitigate the damage, but unable to resolve the core conflict. A cold knot of dread tightened in Izuku's stomach as he pushed his way through the murmuring crowd to get a better look. He recognized the villain instantly. It was the same amorphous, sentient sludge that had poured down his throat, the same foul green and murky texture, the same maniacal, floating eyes. The villain All Might had supposedly captured. He must have dropped the bottle when I grabbed onto him. Izuku realized, a fresh wave of guilt washing over him. This was his fault. If he hadn't been so selfish, so reckless. Then he saw it. Trapped within the swirling, suffocating mass of sludge was a figure, thrashing violently. Spiky, ash-blonde hair. A furious, terrified expression. Red, desperate eyes. And small, continuous explosions erupting from his palms, detonating uselessly within the villain's body and only serving to fuel the surrounding fires. Kaken. The world, which had been muted and gray, suddenly snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. The roar of the flames, the panicked shouts of the crowd, the desperate crackle of Bakugo's explosions, it all crashed down on him at once. He saw the heroes' strained faces, their frustration and impotence. He heard the whispers in the crowd. Why aren't they doing anything? The villain captured a kid. It's been minutes, looks like a real tough one. We'll have to wait for someone with a better quirk to show up. Wait. They were going to wait. Kaken was suffocating. He was dying. Izuku could see it in his eyes. The familiar, arrogant rage was still there, but underneath it was something Izuku had never seen in Katsuki Bakugo's eyes before, pure, undiluted terror. He was fighting. Of course he was fighting, but his struggles were only embedding him deeper. His own powerful quirk turned against him. All Might's words returned, a cold, logical barrier in his mind. You can't. Leave it to the pros. It's too dangerous. His mind agreed. It was suicide. He was quirkless. He had no strength, no power, no way to fight. He would only get in the way, another victim for the heroes to worry about. It was the realistic thing to do. Stay put. Trust the professionals. But his body wasn't listening to realism. It was listening to the frantic, primal scream in his soul that said a friend was in trouble. It was watching Kaken's eyes, seeing the last vestiges of fight begin to fade. It was remembering a time, years ago, when a small boy with spiky hair stood between a young Izuku and a bigger bully, declaring, "If you don't stop making him cry, I'll stop you myself." Kaken had been a hero then. Before Izuku could form a single rational thought, before he could tell himself to stop, his legs were moving. He burst through the police tape. A hero shouted, "Hey! Kid! Stop!" The sound was distant, irrelevant. The world narrowed to a single, desperate track between him and the sludge monster. His mind, catching up to his body, screamed in protest. "What are you doing? You have no plan. You have no quirk. You're going to die." But then, another part of him took over. The part that had filled 13 notebooks with meticulous analysis. The part that had studied every hero, every fight, every possible strategy. The eyes. His brain supplied a spark of clarity in the panic. The villain's real body is the eyes and teeth. It's the only solid part. All Might said so. His gaze flickered down to his yellow backpack. It was all he had. It wasn't much. It was a stupid, childish, pathetic plan. It was all he had. He swung the backpack off his shoulders, his arm arcing forward. Time seemed to stretch, the air thick and heavy like syrup. He saw the surprise in the villain's grotesque eyes. He saw the flicker of shocked recognition in Kaken's. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about being a hero. He wasn't thinking about dreams or quirks or realism. He was just a boy trying to save someone. A pure, selfless, desperate desire to move forward, to close the distance, to help. It was this act, this surge of pure, kinetic intent born not of power but of compassion, that sang a note across the universe. It was a note heard by a consciousness as old as time itself. Across the infinite dimensions of reality, an ocean of energy was dying. It was the speed force, the cosmic engine of all motion, the source of every moving particle, every tick of a clock, every beat of a heart. For eons, it had been a raging, beautiful storm of kinetic and temporal power. But now, its energy was dissipating, ungrounded. It lacked an anchor, a lightning rod, in a physical reality to channel its power and give it form and purpose. Without one, it would fade into nothing, and the concept of motion in countless universes would simply cease. It searched, its senses brushing against trillions of lives across endless worlds. It was looking for a specific resonance, a being capable of selfless, heroic movement, someone who ran not for themselves, but for others. Someone with an indomitable will to move forward against impossible odds. It had found echoes before, fleeting sparks of potential. But this was different. The quirkless boy in a mundane world, running toward certain death with no power to his name, driven by nothing but the desperate need to save another. His spirit was a supernova in the cosmic darkness. His will was a perfect, unwavering frequency. He was the one. The perfect conductor. The perfect anchor. The speed force reached out. Back on the street, as Izuku's backpack sailed through the air, the sky above him, a clear, cloudless blue, tore open. There was no sound at first, just a change in pressure, a sudden, electric stillness that made the hair on everyone's arms stand on end. Then, a line of impossible light scribbled itself across the sky. It was not the simple white-yellow of a normal lightning bolt. This was a torrent of pure energy, a braid of incandescent gold, crackling sapphire blue, and a core of blinding, absolute white. It descended not with a jagged, chaotic path, but with an unnerving, impossible precision, its target singular and absolute. It struck Izuku Midoriya. The world vanished. One moment, he was in motion, adrenaline and terror coursing through him. The next, he was standing in a universe of frozen moments. The crack of the lightning never reached his ears. Instead, a profound, humming silence descended. The world hadn't gone quiet, it had simply stopped. The flames that had been roaring against the buildings were now static, crystalline sculptures of orange and red. The panicked civilians were statues, their faces masks of open-mouthed horror. Death Arms was frozen mid-stride, his fist clenched. The drops of water from Backdraft's hose hung in the air like a diamond necklace. Kaken's backpack, the one he had just thrown, was suspended a few feet from the sludge villain's face, its pencils and notebooks beginning to spill out in a perfect, motionless arc. Izuku was the only thing in the entire world that could move. He looked down at his hands. They were vibrating, humming with an energy that felt both alien and intimately familiar. Arcs of golden lightning, no thicker than a thread, danced between his fingers. He felt everything. He could feel the spin of the earth on its axis. He could feel the frantic beat of Kaken's heart, a slow, struggling thump, 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 that sounded like a funeral drum in the silent world. He could feel the kinetic energy in every suspended atom around him. A storm raged inside him, an infinite ocean of power flooding every cell of his being. It wasn't painful. It was transcendent. His mind, once a chaotic jumble of fear and instinct, was now a place of supreme, preternatural clarity. Information flooded his senses at a rate that should have shattered his sanity. Visions flashed through his mind's eye, not memories, but echoes from the energy that now defined him. A glimpse of a man in a sleek, crimson suit with a lightning bolt insignia, running so fast he became a blur of light through a futuristic, gleaming metropolis. A vision of a Roman legionary clad in armor, wreathed in golden lightning as he deflected a volley of arrows with a flick of his wrist. A fleeting image of a winged, hawk-like creature streaking across the crimson desert of an alien world, leaving a sonic boom in its wake. A young woman with silver hair, laughing as she ran up the side of a skyscraper, her feet crackling with blue energy. Runners. All of them. Anchors. Like him. A voice, not of sound but of pure concept, bloomed in his consciousness. It was the voice of the storm itself, ancient and powerful. Anchor. Guardian. Move forward. Protect the flow. His gaze snapped back to the present, to the frozen tableau of disaster. Kaken. The slow-motion drumbeat of his heart was getting weaker. The sludge was still constricting him, a motionless python. Izuku's new senses told him everything. He could see the exact density of the slime, the precise location of Bakugo's nostrils and mouth, the angle of pressure on his ribs. The problem wasn't an equation to be solved, it was a physical fact to be altered. He took a step. The world around him warped slightly, the edges of his vision streaking with color. He felt the friction of the air against his skin, a gentle pressure that was now as tangible as water. He was at the villain's side in less time than it took for a thought to form. He reached out, his vibrating hand plunging into the viscous sludge. It parted around his fingers with almost no resistance. He didn't just grab Kaken. His movements were impossibly precise, guided by the flood of information in his head. He cleared the slime from his friend's mouth and nose first, creating an airway. His fingers brushed against Kaken's chest, and he pushed, a targeted burst of kinetic energy that forced the sludge to recoil. Then he pulled. It was effortless. He scooped Bakugo out of the villain's grasp as easily as lifting a doll. He was a dozen yards away, placing Kaken gently on the pavement, before the first pencil from his thrown backpack had even hit the ground. He looked back at the villain. The creature's eyes, the only part of it that seemed to perceive the impossible event, were wide with confusion and a dawning terror. Izuku felt the lightning coursing through him, begging for release. He took a running stance, his body thrumming like a tuning fork. He ran. Not far, just a tight circle, maybe 10 feet in diameter. He completed the circle once. Twice. 10 times. 100 times. All in the span of a frozen heartbeat. The air screamed in protest, superheating from the friction. A miniature cyclone began to form, a vortex of wind and dust. He was a human centrifuge, and the sludge villain was at the center. The villain's fluid body was torn apart by the gale, its form shredded and dispersed into thousands of harmless, suspended droplets. Its solid eyes and teeth clattered to the pavement, inert. The infinite energy in his veins began to recede, the cosmic storm pulling back from his mortal body, leaving only a deep, thrumming connection. And as it did, time snapped back into place. The world crashed back into existence with a deafening roar. Sound, motion, heat, light. It was a sensory assault. The vortex Izuku had created dissipated with a final, explosive whoosh of wind that sent debris scattering. The suspended pencils from his backpack clattered to the ground. The heroes unfroze, their shouts catching in their throats. The crowd let out a collective gasp. To them, less than a second had passed. One moment, the quirkless, suicidal kid was running towards the monster. The next, a bolt of impossible lightning had struck him, and in the literal blink of an eye that followed, the villain had been defeated, its victim was safe on the other side of the street, and the boy was standing, trembling, in the center of it all. For Izuku, the return to normal speed was agony. The sudden influx of sensory data was overwhelming. The strain of containing an infinite power, even for a moment, had ravaged his body. Every muscle fiber screamed in protest. His nerve endings felt like they were on fire. A profound, bone-deep exhaustion crashed over him, a wave that threatened to drown him. His legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. His vision swam, the edges turning dark. The last thing he saw before he blacked out was a pair of familiar, wide red eyes. Bakugo was staring at him, his expression not of anger or gratitude, but of pure, unadulterated shock. He was looking at Izuku as if he'd never seen him before. Then, everything went dark. A new sound cut through the chaos. A powerful, booming laugh that was cut short, replaced by a sharp, worried cough. All Might, in his magnificent hero form, landed on the scene. He had been rushing, ready to intervene, but he had seen the whole thing from a block away. He'd seen the boy run. He'd seen the lightning from a clear sky. He'd seen a flash of movement so fast it barely registered as a golden blue streak. He took one look at the situation. The villain dispersed, the hostage safe, and the boy, the same quirkless, teary-eyed boy from the rooftop, unconscious on the ground. He deflated the remains of the villain into a 2-liter bottle with practiced ease, his mind elsewhere entirely. The other heroes and paramedics rushed in, their voices a babble of confusion. "What just happened? Did you see that?" "The lightning," Is that his quirk? Some kind of late-blooming electrical teleportation? Get a stretcher. Check on both kids. All Might strode past them, his shadow falling over Izuku's prone form. The paramedics were already there, checking his vitals, their brows furrowed in confusion. His heart rate is off the charts, but his breathing is steady. He's just exhausted. What kind of quirk does that to a person? All Might knelt, his expression unreadable. He had felt it. A tremor in the air, a scent of ozone and something more, something ancient and powerful. This wasn't a quirk. Quirks were biological, functions of the body, extensions of a person's genetics. This was something else. This was an event. It was as if the universe itself had reached down and chosen this boy. He remembered his own words on the rooftop. You can't be a hero without a quirk. He had never been more wrong in his life. The boy had proven it. He had run in without a quirk. He had acted. And in doing so, he had been granted a power that seemed to dwarf anything All Might had ever seen. The heroic spirit he had recognized in the boy wasn't just a quality, it was a catalyst. The paramedics loaded Izuku onto a stretcher. As they lifted him, his eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, unfocused and hazy. They met All Might's for a fraction of a second. The symbol of peace found himself speechless. The offer he had been about to make, the idea of passing on one for all, now felt inadequate. Redundant. He was no longer looking at a potential successor. He was looking at a mystery. A miracle. A force of nature wearing a middle school uniform. He stood, his gaze following the stretcher as it was wheeled toward the ambulance. The question that formed in his mind was not one of praise, or of scolding, or of recruitment. It was a question born of profound, earth-shattering awe. He approached the paramedics, his voice low and serious, all traces of his booming persona gone. I'll ride with him. Later, after the initial medical checks, as Izuku lay sleeping in a sterile, white hospital bed, Toshinori Yagi sat by his side. He watched the boy, whose body seemed to hum with a faint, residual energy, making the bed frame vibrate slightly. He had answered the police's questions with vague non-answers, protecting the boy from a level of scrutiny the world was not prepared for. He looked at this child who had, in the space of an afternoon, gone from the most powerless person he knew to perhaps the most powerful, and the question that had been burning in his mind since the moment the lightning fell finally surfaced. When Izuku's eyes slowly opened, groggy and confused, they fell upon the skeletal form of his idol. Before he could speak, before he could ask what happened, All Might leaned forward, his expression one of utter, unnerving gravity. Young man, Toshinori said, his voice barely a whisper. I saw what happened. All of it. The run. The lightning. The speed. I need you to be honest with me. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle in the quiet room. What are you? The first thing to breach the black fog of unconsciousness was a sound, a low, persistent hum. It wasn't coming from the room around him, not from any machine or fluorescent light. It was coming from inside him. It was the thrum of a colossal engine idling deep within his bones, a resonant frequency that vibrated through his teeth and echoed in the hollows of his skull. The second thing was a voice, low and grave, cutting through the haze. What are you? Izuku Midoriya's eyes fluttered open. The world was a smear of sterile white and the concerned, gaunt face of the man who was, and wasn't, All Might. He was in a hospital room. The scent of antiseptic filled his nostrils. The thin blanket was coarse against his skin, but beneath these familiar sensations was the alien thrum, a constant, low-level vibration that made the very air around him seem to shimmer. All Might? Izuku's voice was a dry rasp. His throat felt like sandpaper. Toshinori Yagi leaned closer, his deep-set eyes holding an intensity that was far more intimidating than his hero form's bombastic persona. I am here, young Midoriya. But you need to answer my question. What happened back there? That was not a quirk as I know it. Izuku tried to sit up, but a wave of vertigo and exhaustion washed over him, pressing him back into the mattress. He blinked, trying to clear his head, trying to make sense of the fractured memories. The sludge. Kaken's terrified eyes. Running. The impossible feeling of his own legs moving when his brain was screaming at him to stop. And then, the light. I I don't know, he whispered, the honest confusion in his voice absolute. I just ran. I had to save him. Then there was lightning, and everything stopped. He looked down at his hands, half expecting to see them glowing. They looked normal, if a little pale, but he could feel the energy thrumming just beneath the surface, a sleeping giant. It felt like a storm inside me. Toshinori's expression softened slightly, a flicker of understanding replacing the raw intensity. He had seen the boy's spirit. He knew the answer wasn't a lie. The boy was just as lost as everyone else. Before he could press further, the door slid open and a doctor in a white coat entered, followed by a frantic-looking Inko Midoriya. Izuku! Oh, my baby! Inko rushed to his bedside, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch him. Tears were already streaming down her face. They told me what happened! You ran toward a villain! You could have been killed! And then they said you have a quirk? The doctor, a man with a tired face and a clipboard, cleared his throat. Midoriya-san, please. Your son needs to rest. He turned his attention to Izuku, his eyes scanning the readings on the monitor beside the bed. Well, young man, you certainly gave us a scare. And a puzzle. Your vitals are unusual. Your metabolic rate is astronomical, yet you show no signs of cellular decay. Your heart is beating at a rhythm that, by all accounts, should be unsustainable. But you're perfectly stable. He tapped his clipboard. Given the eyewitness accounts of an electrical discharge and sudden high-speed movement, and the fact that your previous quirk status was negative, we're classifying this as a textbook case of a late-blooming manifestation. A very, very powerful one, at that. It seems the high-stress situation of the villain attack was the trigger you needed to unlock your potential. The explanation was logical. It fit into their understanding of the world. It was a neat little box to put the impossible event into. To Izuku, it felt profoundly, fundamentally wrong. A late-blooming manifestation didn't explain the visions, the feeling of an ancient consciousness, the sense that the power wasn't his but was merely passing through him. A quirk, Inko repeated, a wobbly, tearful smile spreading across her face. Oh, Izuku. You got a quirk. Your dream, it's... She broke down into sobs of pure, unadulterated relief, the culmination of a decade of shared sorrow and quiet despair. Izuku could only stare, the doctor's words and his mother's joy feeling like a foreign language. He wanted to feel happy. This was everything he had ever wanted, wasn't it? To have a power of his own, but the humming in his bones told him a different story. This wasn't a part of him. He was a part of it. Toshinori watched the scene silently, his expression unreadable. He knew a cover story when he heard one, even if the doctor believed it himself. He had felt the energy in the air. This was no quirk. This was something else. And he and the boy would have to navigate it alone. The next 2 days were a blur of tests, questions, and a suffocating, terrifying loss of control. The doctors, fascinated by his unique case, ran every scan imaginable. They clocked his reaction time at levels they initially thought were equipment malfunctions. They found his body was healing from the strain of the event at a superhuman rate. On paper, he was a medical marvel. In practice, he was a prisoner in his own body. The vibration never stopped. Sometimes it was a gentle hum. Other times it intensified into a violent tremor that shook the entire bed, forcing the nurses to sedate him. His perception of time was broken. A conversation would feel like it was taking hours, every syllable drawn out, every gesture painfully slow. Then, a whole afternoon would disappear in what felt like a blink. The world was a stream of inconsistent data, and he was drowning in it. The worst part was moving. On the 3rd day, after his mother had gone home to get some rest and the hospital had quieted for the evening, Izuku decided he couldn't stand to lie in bed any longer. The energy coiling in his muscles was screaming for release. He just wanted to walk to the window and look out at the city. A simple, normal act. He carefully swung his legs over the side of the bed. The plastic slippers felt strange against his humming feet. He took a deep breath, focusing with all his might. Slowly, he told himself, just one normal step. He pushed himself up. The world dissolved into a nauseating, high-speed blur. For a fraction of a second, he felt an intense, disorienting coldness in his right foot, a strange, intangible sensation like plunging his limb into static. He looked down. His foot was gone. Or rather, it was halfway through the tiled floor. He could see the pale linoleum, and through it, a ghostly, transparent image of pipes and concrete foundation. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He flailed, trying to pull his foot back, and the sudden movement sent him tumbling forward. He didn't hit the floor. Instead, he found himself standing by the window on the other side of the room, the journey between the bed and the window completely absent from his memory. There was no sensation of movement, just a jarring transition from one point to another. One moment falling, the next standing. The window vibrated under his trembling hand. He looked back at the bed. A glass of water that had been on his bedside table was now suspended in midair, its fall so slow it was barely perceptible. It hung there, a perfect, glistening teardrop, before continuing its glacial descent to the floor. He was moving too fast. His own perception was too fast. The world couldn't keep up. He tried to take a step back, and this time he phased his hand through the wall. The sensation was horrifying, a complete lack of texture, a biting cold, and a low thrum that vibrated up his arm. He snatched it back as if burned, his heart hammering against his ribs. Tears of frustration and fear welled in his eyes. This wasn't a gift. It was a curse. He couldn't walk. He couldn't touch things without breaking them or passing through them. How could he be a hero if he couldn't even control his own body? He had been given the power he always dreamed of, only to find it was an unbreakable cage. He slid down the wall, curling into a ball on the floor, the internal vibration now a frantic, terrifying shudder. He was scared to move, scared to even breathe. That was how All Might found him half an hour later, having slipped past the nurses in his civilian form. He found the boy huddled in a corner, trembling, with a shattered water glass on the floor that looked like it had taken an eternity to fall. Tashinori's expression was filled with a deep, paternal sympathy. He didn't say anything at first. He simply walked over, his movements seeming achingly slow to Izuku's heightened senses, and crouched down. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" he said, his voice soft. Izuku looked up, his face pale and tear-streaked. I can't control it," he stammered, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I try to walk and I end up across the room. I touch the wall and my hand went through it. The world is too slow, and I'm too fast. I'm scared, All Might. I think this power is broken." Tashinori put a hand on his shoulder. To Izuku, the motion was a majestic, slow-motion arc. The contact was grounding, the slight weight a comforting anchor in his chaotic sensory world. "It is not broken, young Midoriya," Tashinori said, his voice firm but kind. "It is new. Any great power is like a wild beast. It must be tamed. Understood. Respected." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the trembling boy. "On that rooftop, I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. I was wrong. I let my own limitations, my own broken body, color my judgment. I failed to see what was right in front of me." He took a breath, the words heavy with sincerity. "Your spirit, your drive to save others without a thought for yourself, that is the core of a true hero. The power you have now did not grant you that spirit. That spirit is what attracted the power. Do you understand? The power did not make you a hero, Izuku Midoriya. You were already one." Izuku stared, his tears stopping. The validation, the pure, unvarnished praise from his lifelong idol, was a balm on his frayed nerves. "Which brings me to my offer," Tashinori continued. "It's different from the one I was going to make on that rooftop. I cannot give you my power. Frankly, it seems you no longer need it, and I cannot teach you how to use this new ability of yours. I don't understand it any more than you do. It's a phenomenon unlike anything I have ever encountered." He leaned in, his eyes locking with Izuku's. "But I can teach you how to be a hero. I can teach you control, discipline, and focus. I can provide you with a place to train where you won't phase through the floor or accidentally break the sound barrier. We can study this power, together. We will write the user's manual for it, you and I. What do you say, young man? Will you let me help you tame the beast?" Hope, bright and overwhelming, surged through Izuku's chest, a warmth that for the first time seemed to push back against the cold, alien energy humming within him. It was a lifeline. He wasn't alone in this. The greatest hero in the world was offering to be his guide, his partner. He nodded, unable to form words, a fresh wave of grateful tears blurring his vision. For the first time since the lightning strike, he didn't feel like a freak or a prisoner. He felt like a hero in training. Izuku was discharged the next day under the official story of quirk-related exhaustion. Tashinori had arranged everything, pulling strings Izuku didn't know existed. His mother was still worried, but the presence of All Might vouching for her son's potential had calmed her fears considerably. That night, alone in his bedroom, a shrine to the very man who was now his mentor, Izuku couldn't sleep. The vibration was back, a low, insistent hum that seemed to call to him. The world outside his window was quiet, but inside him, the storm was waiting. He remembered All Might's words. Understood. Respected. He couldn't run from this power. He couldn't fear it. He had to face it. He had to understand it. He sat up in his bed, crossing his legs and placing his hands on his knees, mimicking a meditative pose he'd seen on TV. He closed his eyes, shutting out the familiar posters and action figures. He shut out the sound of the cicadas outside. He focused inward, not on his thoughts or his breathing, but on the vibration. He chased the hum down, following it to its source, deep in the core of his being. For a long time, nothing happened. But he persisted, his mind, honed by years of obsessive analysis, latching onto the sensation with singular focus. He didn't try to suppress the energy. He opened himself to it. He let the hum grow, let the vibration intensify, let the lightning that danced just beneath his skin come to the surface. A faint, golden light began to emanate from his body. The air in his room grew thick, charged with static electricity. His posters began to curl at the edges, and then, he felt a pull. It wasn't a physical sensation, but a spiritual one. It was as if a cosmic fishing line had hooked his soul and was reeling him in. He didn't fight it. He let go. The world of his bedroom dissolved. He was no longer sitting on his bed. He was standing on a racetrack that stretched into infinity in every direction. There was no ground, no sky, only an endless expanse of crackling, coruscating energy. It was an ocean of living lightning, a celestial storm that was both beautiful and terrifying. Rivers of gold, blue, and white plasma flowed in great, arcing currents around him. Distant, nebula-like clouds of kinetic energy pulsed with the rhythm of a billion heartbeats. In the far distance, he could see other lights, streaks of silver, crimson, and violet, moving at impossible speeds, like comets tracing paths across the cosmic landscape. They were the other runners, the echoes he had glimpsed before. He was standing in the source. He was inside the storm. This was the speed force. Fear tried to grip him, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of awe. He felt home. The humming in his bones finally made sense. It wasn't a foreign energy invading him. It was the song of this place, and his body was now a resonant chamber. As he stood in stunned silence, a wave of pure information washed over him, the voice that was not a voice, the communication of pure concept. Anchor. The concept flooded his mind with the feeling of immense weight and responsibility. He saw an image of a great ship being torn apart in a hurricane, and then a single, heavy anchor holding it fast, saving it from destruction. He understood. He was the ground wire. He was the tether that kept this infinite, chaotic energy connected to his reality, giving it stability and purpose. Without him, or someone like him, it would fly apart into nothingness. Guardian. This came with a powerful feeling of protectiveness. He felt the life and vitality of the speed force, its role as the engine of all movement in his universe, from the orbits of planets to the firing of synapses in a brain. It was a fundamental law of existence, and it was vulnerable. It needed a protector, a warden to stand watch at its gate. Move forward. This was not just a command, it was a philosophy. The images that came with it were not of running, but of struggle and triumph. A seedling pushing through concrete. A scientist making a breakthrough after a lifetime of failure. A society rebuilding from the ashes of war. The speed force wasn't just about speed, it was about progress. It was the fundamental universal drive to overcome inertia, to fight against entropy, to always move forward. It was the story of Izuku's own life, his relentless push against the world telling him to stand still, protect the flow. The final concept was darker, more ominous. He felt a vision of a river of pure, clean water. Then, a drop of thick, black poison fell into it, spreading and corrupting the current, turning it sluggish and foul. He felt a cold, parasitic presence at the edge of his perception, a negative force that sought not to move, but to stop. A force that wanted to consume and stagnate. This was his true enemy, not villains with flashy quirks, but anything that threatened the fundamental motion of existence. The torrent of information receded, leaving Izuku standing on the infinite racetrack, breathless and trembling with the sheer scale of the revelation. The doctor was wrong. His mother was wrong. All Might was right. This wasn't a quirk. A quirk was a tool, a biological function, a part of a person. This was a mantle. A cosmic duty. A sacred trust. The power wasn't his. He was its chosen caretaker. He hadn't been given a gift. He had been given a job, perhaps the most important job in the universe. He looked out at the endless, beautiful storm, at the heart of all motion and time, and for the first time, he understood. He wasn't Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy who got lucky. He was Izuku Midoriya, the guardian of the Speed Force, and his training was about to begin. The 10 months leading up to the UA entrance exam began not with a triumphant shout or a grand declaration, but with the quiet, rhythmic crash of waves against a mountain of rusted metal. Dagoba Municipal Beach was less a shoreline and more a scrapyard, a testament to years of illegal dumping and societal neglect. The air was thick with the stench of salt, rust, and decay. It was here, amidst the wreckage of a forgotten coast, that Izuku Midoriya's new life would be forged. Right then, young Midoriya, Toshinori Yagi said, his voice a gravelly rumble in the morning air. He stood in his skeletal form, wrapped in a thick coat against the sea breeze, looking profoundly out of place. Your journey starts now. But I must be clear. This is not the training I had originally envisioned for a successor. Izuku, shivering slightly in his green tracksuit, nodded, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The humming in his bones was a constant companion now, a low thrum of potential that felt like a pack of greyhounds straining at the leash. I understand, All Might, you said. I don't need to build muscle to contain the power. Precisely, Toshinori affirmed, pointing a bony finger at a derelict, rust-eaten refrigerator. Your predecessor, One for All, is a stockpiling quirk. It is a loaded cannon that requires a strong physical body to fire without shattering the user to pieces. But your power, the Speed Force, as you call it, is different. It is not a cannon you are firing. It is a raging river, and you are standing in the middle of it. Building bigger muscles won't stop you from being swept away. This training is not about strength. It is about building a dam. He tapped his temple. A dam of will. Of focus. He then tapped his chest. And an anchor of physical and mental endurance to withstand the strain of the current. Izuku's first task was simple. Run from one end of the beach to the other. A distance of roughly 500 meters, littered with obstacles. Just run? Izuku asked, blinking. Just run. Toshinori confirmed, a grim line to his mouth. Try to do it at what feels like a comfortable jogging pace. Don't push yourself. Just move. It sounded deceptively easy. Izuku took a deep breath, trying to calm the electric fizzing in his veins. He remembered his terrifying experience in the hospital, the phasing, the unintentional teleportation. Control, he told himself. Just a little bit. He focused on the feeling of the power, trying to draw out only a sliver of it. He took his first step. The world went silent. A sonic boom, a deafening crack, exploded from his starting position, sending a shockwave that kicked up a massive cloud of sand and rattled the junk piles for 100 meters in every direction. Toshinori was thrown back several feet, coughing as he shielded his face. Izuku found himself standing at the far end of the beach, his ears ringing violently, the smell of burnt ozone stinging his nostrils. His tracksuit was smoking, and the soles of his running shoes had been completely vaporized, leaving his bare feet tingling against the sand. He hadn't felt himself move. There was no sensation of running, just a before and an after, and a violent, uncontrolled transition in between. He looked back at the stunned form of his mentor. I think I went too fast, he said, his voice trembling. Tashinori pushed himself up, wiping sand from his face. A thin trickle of blood ran from his mouth. He wasn't angry. Instead, his eyes held a look of profound, staggering awe. Young man, he coughed, we have a great deal of work to do. The first 3 months were a litany of failures. Each attempt to control the speed force ended in chaos. A light jog resulted in a sonic boom. An attempt to pick up a small piece of scrap metal resulted in him vibrating his hand straight through it. He tried to mimic the heroes he'd studied, throwing a punch at a sturdy-looking washing machine. His fist passed harmlessly through the rusted metal, but the kinetic energy he displaced blew the back of the machine out in a shower of sparks and shredded steel. He burned through a dozen pairs of shoes. His clothes were constantly being singed or torn apart by the sheer friction of his uncontrolled movements. Tashinori, ever the patient mentor, began bringing reinforced, fire-retardant athletic wear he'd sourced from a hero support company, claiming it was for a protege with a friction quirk. You are thinking about it like a quirk, Tashinori explained one afternoon, as they sat on a relatively clean, discarded car hood. Izuku was trying to cool his raw, blistered feet in the surf. You are trying to activate it and use it. You try to punch, and you pour all the energy into your fist. You try to run, and you pour it all into your legs. The river is flooding one part of you and leaving the rest dry. You are not channeling the power, young Midoriya. You are letting it burst through you. Izuku looked down at his hands, frustrated. But how do I channel it? When I reach for it, it's all or nothing. It's an ocean. How do you take just one drop of water from an ocean? The question lingered, unanswered. All Might could provide wisdom and a safe space, but he couldn't give him the solution. That was a journey Izuku had to take himself, and so, he turned to the one tool that had never failed him, his mind. He went home each evening, physically and mentally drained, and opened a brand new notebook. The cover was a simple, stark black. On the first page, in neat, precise lettering, he wrote, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14, The Speed Force. This notebook was different. It wasn't filled with fawning sketches of heroes or speculative notes on their ultimate moves. It was a scientific journal, a desperate attempt to codify the impossible. The pages began to fill with frantic, brilliant scrawls. He started with the problems. Problem 1, kinetic overflow. Any attempt at movement results in an exponential, uncontrolled release of energy. Hypothesis. My body is acting as a simple, open conduit, not a regulator. The speed force has no inherent governor. It relies entirely on the user's will. Problem 2, friction atmosphere. Movement at even perceived low speeds generates extreme heat and atmospheric displacement, sonic booms. Standard materials cannot withstand the forces involved. Hypothesis. The energy is not just propelling me. It is interacting with the environment on a molecular level. Am I simply moving through the air, or am I pushing reality itself out of my way? Problem 3, phasing/intangibility. Uncontrolled vibration causes my body's atomic structure to oscillate, allowing it to pass through solid matter. This is involuntary and extremely dangerous. Hypothesis. Control over my personal vibrational frequency is key. Can I learn to do this on command? Could be a useful tool for evasion or infiltration, but is currently a life-threatening bug. He began to draw diagrams. He sketched his own body, but instead of muscles, he drew currents of energy, showing how they flooded his limbs uncontrollably. He wrote down physics equations, trying to calculate the theoretical energy output of a single step. He filled pages with theories on temporal mechanics, wondering if he was truly moving faster or if he was subtly slowing down the world around him. His analysis, once a hobby, had become his key to survival. The shift happened halfway through the 7th month. Izuku was exhausted. He had spent the morning trying and failing to simply carry a small, rusted engine block 10 feet without either phasing through it or accidentally throwing it into the ocean at Mach 3. He was sitting on the sand, staring at his notebook, at a diagram he had drawn of a lightning rod. A lightning rod doesn't try to stop the lightning. It doesn't try to fight the storm. It provides a safe path, guiding the immense energy from the sky to the ground, containing it along its surface. Containing it along its surface. The thought was a spark, a flicker of an idea that quickly grew into a raging fire of inspiration. Tashinori's words echoed in his head. You are letting it burst through you. He had been doing it all wrong. He had been trying to fill himself up with the power, to let it flow through his muscles and bones. But what if he didn't? What if, instead of opening the floodgates and letting the river rush through him, he tried to divert its current to flow around him? Like an aura. A shell. A suit of armor made of pure energy. He stood up, his heart pounding with nervous excitement. This felt different. This felt like a real theory. All might! He called out. Tashinori, who had been observing from a distance, walked over. I have an idea. I think I know what I've been doing wrong. He closed his eyes, not reaching for the overwhelming ocean of power in the speed force, but focusing on the trace amounts already humming in his body. He didn't try to pull more in, he simply tried to guide what was already there. He visualized the energy not as a torrent filling him up, but as a thin, crackling film spreading over his skin. He imagined it wrapping around him, a second skin of golden lightning. He felt a familiar surge, the roar of the infinite engine. But this time, it wasn't a chaotic flood. It was a contained, controlled hum. He opened his eyes. He was glowing. A soft, golden-white aura, shot through with arcs of his own innate green bioelectricity, clung to his body like a living flame. It didn't burn. It felt warm. Stable. He could feel the immense power, but it wasn't raging inside him. It was sheathing him, protecting him. He lifted his hand, and the aura flared slightly, green and gold lightning dancing between his fingers. Young Midoriya! Tashinori breathed, his eyes wide with shock and pride. I'm not letting it in, Izuku said, a giddy, triumphant laugh bubbling in his chest. I'm wearing it. It's like a full-body cowl of energy. He clenched his fist, feeling the controlled, focused power thrumming within his new armor. Full cowl. He took a step. No sonic boom. No accidental teleportation. Just a smooth, controlled burst of speed that carried him 10 feet forward, leaving a small puff of sand in his wake. He took another, and another, running in a controlled, graceful arc across the beach. He wasn't just moving, he was running. He could feel the sand under his reinforced sneakers, the wind on his face. The world was still moving slower than he was, but it was no longer a frozen tableau. It was a comprehensible, navigable space. Tears of joy streamed down his face, evaporating almost instantly from the heat of his aura. He skidded to a stop in front of All Might, his entire body buzzing with controlled, manageable power. He had built his dam. The last 3 months of training were a world away from the first 7. With full cowl, Izuku had found his governor. Now, it was a matter of learning to drive. He started by cleaning the beach. It was Tashinori's idea, a perfect blend of public service and a high-intensity training exercise. It wasn't just about moving junk. It was about control. He had to learn to apply his speed with surgical precision. He would carry a teetering stack of old televisions, learning to maintain perfect balance at 200 miles per hour. He would vibrate his hand just enough to loosen a bolt on a piece of machinery without disintegrating the entire thing. He learned to perceive the world while moving at high speed, his brain processing thousands of details every second to navigate the treacherous landscape of scrap metal. He also began to experiment. He discovered that by running in a tight circle, he could use the principles of air displacement to create powerful vortexes, capable of lifting heavy objects or disorienting an opponent. He learned that by clapping his hands together at super speed, he could create a targeted sonic shockwave. His notebook was now filled not with problems, but with possibilities. He started categorizing his developing skills, giving them names like a true hero. Cyclone Dash. Air Force Clap. He started working with percentages. Full cowl, 5%, he would mutter, and a faint, barely visible aura would surround him, perfect for controlled, athletic movement. 10%, and the aura would brighten, the lightning crackling more intensely, allowing him to move faster than a bullet train. He found his current limit was around 15 to 20% before the strain on his mind and body became too much to handle, but it was a limit he could work with. On the final morning, 10 months after he began, Izuku Midoriya stood atop the last and largest pile of junk. The sun was rising over a pristine, beautiful coastline. The beach was clean. Toshinori Yagi, looking healthier and prouder than Izuku had ever seen him, stood on the sand below. Izuku leaped from the pile, his body wreathed in a gentle 5% full cowl, and landed softly before his mentor. "You did it, young Midoriya," Toshinori said, his voice thick with emotion. "You truly did it." Izuku looked at his hands, at the faint green sparks dancing over his knuckles. He had tamed the beast. He was ready. The UA entrance exam auditorium was buzzing with nervous energy. Izuku, seated amongst hundreds of other hopefuls, felt a strange sense of calm. The ever-present hum of the speed force within him was a quiet, steady companion, a reservoir of power waiting to be called upon. He aced the written portion, his speed-enhanced mind processing the questions with ease. Now came the practical. The boisterous hero present Mike was on stage, explaining the rules. 3 types of robots, worth 1, 2, and 3 points respectively. Izuku's mind was already at work, not just on accumulating points, but on strategy. Optimal pathing through the urban environment. Prioritize 3-pointers while remaining aware of examinee clusters. Potential for collateral damage is high. Primary objective, disable targets. Secondary objective, ensure safety of other participants. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with engines in his calves stood up to question President Mike about the mysterious 4th robot type and to admonish Izuku for muttering. It was Tenya Ida. In another life, Izuku would have been flustered and embarrassed. Now, he simply gave a calm, apologetic nod. His focus was absolute. Ida was a potential colleague, not a distraction. When they arrived at the gates of Battle Center B, Izuku fell into a light crouch, his eyes scanning the cityscape beyond. He could feel the electricity in the air, the thrum of the dormant robots waiting inside. "And start!" President Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. While the other students stood in confused silence, Izuku was already gone. "Full cowl, 8%. He whispered. A brilliant flash of green and gold lightning, and he was through the gates. To the other examinees, he simply vanished. To the teachers in the observation room, he was a green-gold streak on the monitor, a blur of motion that was almost impossible to track. "Well, he's eager," President Mike commented on the broadcast. A 1-pointer emerged from an alleyway. Before its optical sensor could even focus, Izuku was upon it. He didn't throw a devastating punch. His movements were too fast, too precise for that. He ran up its chassis, his feet barely touching the metal, and drove a hand vibrating at a low frequency into the robot's neck joint. There was a high-pitched screech of tortured metal, and the robot's head fell clean off its shoulders. He was gone before it hit the ground. 1 point. He rounded a corner and saw a group of 3 2-pointers cornering a girl with purple hair and earphone jacks dangling from her lobes. They raised their cannon-like arms to fire. Izuku didn't hesitate. He ran a circle around them in less than a second. A miniature cyclone erupted, lifting the heavy robots from their feet. They crashed into each other, a tangle of sparking limbs and crushed metal. Izuku gave the stunned girl a quick nod and sped off. 6 points. He moved through the city like a phantom. He was a force of surgical efficiency. He'd phase a hand through a robot's central processor and solidify it, crushing the electronics within. He'd use a targeted Air Force clap to blow the legs out from under a 3-pointer. He was racking up points at an astonishing rate, but that wasn't his sole focus. His enhanced perception, a result of months of training his mind to keep up with his body, allowed him to maintain a constant, 360-degree awareness of his surroundings. He could hear the panicked breathing of a boy trapped under rubble 3 blocks away. He could see the trajectory of a stray laser beam and know who it would hit if he didn't intervene. He became a guardian angel in the midst of the chaos. He'd appear as a flash of light to pull someone from the path of a falling robot. He'd disable a machine that was about to ambush a cocky, explosion-wielding applicant who was too focused on showing off. He wasn't just earning villain points, he was farming rescue points on an unprecedented scale. In the observation room, the mood was one of stunned disbelief. "Who is this kid?" Snipe drawled, leaning forward. Izuku Midoriya, Aizawa said, his eyes glued to the screen, a rare flicker of interest in his tired gaze. His file says late blooming velocity quirk. That doesn't quite cover it, does it? Nizu, the principal, was watching with a wide, unnerving smile. Oh, I don't think that covers it at all. He's not just powerful. He's thoughtful. Suddenly, the ground began to shake. A shadow fell over the entire battle center as the behemoth emerged from between the buildings, the zero-pointer. It was a Goliath of green metal, bigger than the tallest skyscraper, an obstacle designed to be avoided, not fought. Panic erupted. The other examinees, their bravado shattered, turned and fled. It was a force of nature, an intimidation tactic. Then a cry. Help! I'm stuck! Izuku's head snapped towards the sound. It was the friendly, brown-haired girl he'd met at the gates, Achiko Uraraka. A large slab of concrete had pinned her leg. She was directly in the path of the zero-pointer's massive, crushing foot. The other students ran past her, their own survival their only concern. For Izuku, time slowed to a crawl. He saw the descending foot of the robot, the terror in Uraraka's eyes, the straining of her muscles as she tried to pull herself free. In his mind, a dozen calculations ran in a microsecond. Threat, zero-pointer. Imminent danger to civilian. Objective, rescue. Direct confrontation with threat is inefficient and high risk. Mass of threat is too great for kinetic redirection. Option 1, destroy threat. Unfeasible with current output. Option 2, remove civilian from danger zone. There was no debate. No hesitation. He pushed his power higher than he ever had before. Full cowl, 15%. The green and gold aura around him exploded in intensity. The ground beneath his feet cracked. He didn't run towards the zero-pointer to fight it. He ran towards the path of destruction. He reached Uraraka in the blink of an eye. Don't worry! I've got you! He yelled, his voice clear and confident. He didn't try to lift the slab of concrete. It would take too long. Instead, he placed his hands on it and vibrated them at an intense frequency. The concrete dissolved into a cascade of dust and pebbles around her leg. Now run! He commanded. But he knew she couldn't. Her ankle was likely sprained. The robot's foot was descending, a colossal shadow of death. Izuku grabbed her, pulling her into his arms. And then, he did something he had only theorized about in his notebook. He focused, pushing a sliver of the speed force's energy not into his own body, but into hers. Kinetic energy lending. For Uraraka, the world became a terrifying, silent blur of color. She felt a strange lightness, and the boy holding her spoke, his voice seeming to echo from everywhere at once. Hold on! Izuku ran. He carried her 100 meters away, placing her gently down with a group of other fleeing students before the zero-pointer's foot had even completed its descent. But he wasn't done. He turned back. The robot's impact had sent a shockwave of debris flying towards the other students. Large chunks of asphalt and steel were raining down on them. Izuku became a living shield. He moved between the students and the falling rain of death, a blur of motion. A piece of rebar the size of a car was hurtling towards Tenya Ida. Izuku appeared in its path, vibrated his entire body to the perfect frequency, and let the massive projectile pass harmlessly through him. He slapped smaller pieces of debris out of the air, creating miniature sonic booms that sounded like a string of firecrackers. He was everywhere at once, a one-man evacuation and defense force. When the dust settled, the zero-pointer lumbered on, having passed them. Every single student was untouched, huddled together, staring in absolute, reverent awe at the boy standing before them, crackling with green and gold lightning. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku's aura faded. The strain of the 15% output, combined with the complex mental gymnastics of the rescue, hit him all at once. He staggered, falling to one knee, panting heavily. The world rushed back to its normal, sluggish pace. In the observation room, there was dead silence. Aizawa had lowered his goggles, his mouth slightly agape. President Mike had forgotten how to speak. Finally, Niza clapped his tiny paws together. Well, he said, his smile wider than ever. I think we've found something truly special. A technician's voice crackled over the intercom. Sirs? We have the final tally for examinee Izuku Midoriya. Go on. Niza prompted. 77 villain points, the technician said, his voice filled with disbelief. And 120 rescue points. It's the highest score in the history of the exam. By a factor of 2, Izuku didn't hear any of this. He was on one knee, catching his breath, as Uraraka, Ida, and a dozen other students he had saved slowly approached, their faces a mixture of gratitude and pure, unadulterated wonder. He had done it. He hadn't just passed. He had shown them what kind of hero he was going to be. Not the strongest. Not the one who smashed the biggest foe. The one who was always there in time to save everyone. The gates of UA High were more than just an entrance. They were a threshold. For 10 agonizing months, Izuku Midoriya had stood on the outside looking in, dreaming of the day he would walk this path. Now, as he stepped onto the prestigious campus, the crisp morning air felt different, charged with possibility. The quiet, ever-present hum of the speed force in his veins seemed to resonate with the ambitious energy of the place, a low, steady thrum of belonging. He was not the same boy who had stood here a year ago, a quirkless hopeful staring up at his impossible dream. That boy was a bundle of nerves, a well of anxieties. This Izuku walked with a quiet confidence, his steps measured and sure. The speed force had not just given him power, it had granted him a profound sense of purpose that settled his soul. He was a guardian, and this school was a vital step in learning what that meant. He found Class 1A without issue, his enhanced perception drinking in the school's layout with eidetic precision. The door was comically oversized, a practical consideration for students with size-altering quirks, but a clear statement all the same: prepare for the extraordinary. He took a centering breath and slid it open. The scene inside was one of controlled chaos. The tall, spectacled boy from the exam, Tenya Ida, was rigidly chastising a spiky-haired blonde for having his feet on the desk. And that blonde was Kaken, of course. Some things never changed. "Ah, it's you!" Ida's head snapped towards him, his arm chopping the air with robotic precision. "The one with the plain face. I must apologize for my conduct at the entrance exam. You grasped the true nature of the test while I did not. I was mistaken about you." Before Izuku could respond to the surprisingly earnest apology, a cheerful voice cut in. "Oh, hi! You're the one who saved me! The vibrating punch guy!" The bubbly, brown-haired girl, Achiko Uraraka, bounced on her heels. "That was amazing! You just went whoosh and then VRRR and then you were just gone! It was so cool!" A faint blush touched Izuku's cheeks, but he smiled genuinely. "It was nothing. I'm glad you're okay. I'm Izuku Midoriya, Achiko Uraraka. It's nice to meet you, Midoriya-kun." Their pleasantries were shattered by a low, guttural growl. Katsuki Bakugo had slowly turned in his seat, his feet dropping to the floor with a thud. His crimson eyes were locked on Izuku, narrowed into slits of incandescent fury. But underneath the rage, Izuku's heightened senses could perceive something else, a deep, jarring dissonance. It was the look of a man whose entire understanding of the universe had been violently upended. "Deku!" Bakugo snarled, the name a venomous curse. "You bastard! You did have a quirk all along, didn't you? You've been looking down on me all this time, laughing at me behind my back with your flashy fucking light show." The accusation was so far from the truth it was almost absurd. The old Izuku would have flinched, stammered, and tried desperately to explain. But the guardian of the Speed Force was not the same as the quirkless boy. He met Bakugo's glare without wavering, his expression calm. "No, Kaken," he said, his voice even. "I haven't. It's complicated. But what I did at the exam had nothing to do with you." He offered a small, placating smile. "We're classmates now. Let's just try to get along." That placid response was, to Bakugo, like throwing gasoline on a bonfire. The idea that Deku, the useless, worthless pebble he had spent his entire life kicking out of his path, was not only powerful but was now patronizing him with a calm smile. It was anathema. It broke the natural order of his world. "Don't you dare talk down to me, you piece of... If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave." A new voice, tired and utterly devoid of enthusiasm, cut through the tension. Everyone turned to see a man lying on the floor by the door, zipped up in a yellow sleeping bag like a giant caterpillar. He slowly unzipped it and rose to his feet, revealing a man with a perpetually exhausted expression, dark, messy hair, and a capture weapon that looked like a scarf wrapped around his neck. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not going to work," the man said, taking a sip from a juice pouch. "I'm Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher." A collective wave of shock went through the class. This was a pro hero. Aizawa rummaged through his sleeping bag and pulled out a set of blue gym uniforms. "Put these on and meet me on the field. We're having a quirk apprehension test." The field was abuzz with confused murmurs. "A quirk test on the first day? But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation? Yui gives its teachers a lot of freedom, I guess." Uraraka whispered to Izuku. Aizawa addressed the class, his tone flat. "The government still runs standardized tests that forbid the use of quirks. It's irrational. Yui is a hero course. We're here to see what you're made of." He tossed a softball to Bakugo. "You, Bakugo. You got the highest score on the practical exam for villains, correct? What was your farthest softball throw in middle school?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Bakugo strode into the circle, a feral grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and with a deafening explosion, launched the ball into the sky. "Die!" he screamed, as he always did. The ball was a speck, then it was gone. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in cheers. "Amazing! We can use our quirks for real! This is gonna be fun!" "Fun?" Aizawa's voice dropped, a sudden chill in the air. A dark, predatory smile crept onto his face. "You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Fine. New rule. Whoever comes in last place in the final tally will be judged as having no potential and will be expelled." Immediately, the blood drained from the students' faces. The fun atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, palpable tension. This was real. This was Yui. Izuku felt a surge of adrenaline, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. This wasn't just a test of power, it was a test of control, creativity, and application. For him, it was the first real demonstration of the fruits of his 10 months of brutal training. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired with Ida. The engine quirk user got into a sprinter's stance, his calf engines already humming. Izuku simply stood at the line, taking a calm, deep breath. Just a flicker, he told himself. Full cowl, 1%. A barely perceptible shimmer of green-gold light washed over him for a microsecond. The starting pistol fired. There was a sound like a quiet snap of static electricity. To the other students, it looked as though Izuku had simply ceased to exist at the starting line and rematerialized at the finish. There was no blur, no streak of light, just a subtle displacement of air where he had been. Ida, who had blasted off the line with incredible speed, was only halfway down the track when Izuku was already stopping. The automated voice from the sensor at the finish line announced the times. 3.04 seconds. A pause. 0.02 seconds. The class stared in stunned silence. 0.02 seconds. It wasn't a time, it was a rounding error. It was faster than a camera shutter, faster than a thought. How? Ida gasped, clutching his calves as he finished. Izuku just gave a small shrug. I'm fast. Next was the grip strength test. He saw a large, muscular boy with multiple arms, Mizo Shoji, get an impressive 540 kilograms. Izuku stepped up to the machine. He knew that if he simply gripped it and poured in the energy, he could probably crush the device into a diamond. But that wasn't control. He took the handle, and instead of squeezing, he activated his power internally. His hand began to vibrate at a high frequency, the motion invisible to the naked eye. The energy transferred through his palm into the machine's sensor. The digital display flickered wildly before settling on a number. 812 kilograms. He hadn't even strained. He simply allowed his resonant energy to fool the machine. More murmurs. More stares. He was an enigma. The tests continued in a similar vein. He cleared the long jump with a single, effortless leap that landed him gently in the sandpit on the other side. He scored perfect marks on the repeated sidesteps, appearing as little more than a flickering afterimage. He wasn't just powerful, he was efficient, precise, and utterly untouchable. The final, most anticipated test was the ball throw. The class watched with bated breath as Uraraka, using her zero-gravity quirk, touched the ball and threw it. It sailed up, and up, and up, never coming down. Aizawa's device beeped. Infinity. A wave of awe went through the students. How could anyone top that? Now, it was Izuku's turn. He stepped into the circle, the familiar softball feeling light in his hand. He could see Bakugo glaring at him from the crowd, his knuckles white. This was the same test that had defined their relationship in their quirkless childhoods, a measure of physical prowess where Izuku had always fallen short. He closed his eyes, accessing the wellspring of power within him. He wasn't going to throw it with his arm. His arm was just a delivery system. He was going to give the ball a taste of the speed force, kinetic energy lending. He pulled his arm back, his body crackling with a 10% full cowl. The green and gold lightning, now familiar to his classmates, arced across his skin. But this time, it did something different. The lightning flowed down his arm, away from his body, and into the ball. The white sphere began to glow, first a soft green, then a brilliant gold. It hummed with contained energy, vibrating so intensely it was a blur in his palm. He threw. His arm moved in a smooth, simple arc. There was no explosive effort, no scream of exertion. The moment the ball left his fingertips, it unleashed the energy it had been fed. There was no sound at first, only a silent, violent displacement of air. A perfect, circular shockwave erupted from Izuku's hand, knocking several students off their feet. The ball itself vanished. It didn't fly. It simply ceased to be there. A thin, white vapor trail, like a scratch across the sky, was the only evidence it had ever existed, pointing straight up into the heavens. A few seconds later, a distant, rolling boom echoed down from the upper atmosphere as the ball broke the sound barrier several times over. The class was speechless. Their jaws were on the floor. Bakugo's rage had been replaced by a cold, stark disbelief. Aizawa lowered his device, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He turned it so the class could see the screen. It displayed a single, elegant symbol, infinity. He had matched Uraraka's score through a completely different, and frankly terrifying, application of power. His score is infinity too, Kaminari whispered. But what the hell is his quirk? Kirishima asked, his eyes wide. It's like he has super speed, super strength, and some kind of energy power all in one. Aizawa turned to the class. Time to see the results. He projected the final scores. In first place was Izuku Midoriya. In second, a versatile and brilliant Momo Yaoyorozu. In third, a powerful Shoto Todoroki. Bakugo was fourth. And in last place, a terrified, sweating Minoru Mineta. And I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa said, his grin returning. It was a logical deception to make you push your limits. While most of the class cried out in relieved protest, Aizawa's eyes were locked on his top student. Midoriya hadn't even broken a sweat. He hadn't revealed a single weakness. His power was registered as high-velocity kinesis, but that was a gross oversimplification. Aizawa had seen the lightning, the vibrations, the impossible speed that registered as teleportation. This wasn't just a quirk. It was something else. And the boy was hiding how deep the rabbit hole truly went. For the first time in a long time, Shota Aizawa was genuinely intrigued. The foundational heroics class was the highlight of the day. And when All Might, in all his golden age glory, burst through the door, the class went wild. I am here, coming through the door like a normal person. Izuku felt a genuine, warm smile spread across his face. Seeing his mentor in his public persona, knowing the frail man beneath, filled him with a unique sense of pride and shared purpose. All Might announced their first exercise, the battle trial. They would be split into teams of 2, heroes versus villains, in a simulated urban environment. Their goal was either to capture the villains or secure a nuclear weapon prop, and to be a true hero. All Might boomed, pressing a button. You need a costume. Wall panels slid open, revealing numbered cases. Izuku's was number 18. He opened it to find the costume his mother had so lovingly designed, but with the upgrades he had requested from the UA support department based on his own analysis. The base was a durable, teal-green jumpsuit made of a high-tensile, friction-resistant polymer designed to withstand the heat and stress of his speed. The white gloves and red boots were reinforced with shock-absorbing alloys. The metal respirator, a tribute to All Might's smile, was still there, but it now contained a high-flow air filtration system, and the headpiece, with its long, floppy ears, had been fitted with a communications device and sensory filters to help him process information at high speed. It was perfect. Stepping out into the training ground, Izuku felt a surge of confidence. He looked the part. Now he had to play it. He was teamed up with Uraraka. Wow, Deku-kun! A cool costume, she said, giving him a thumbs up. Her own was a sleek, pink and black spacesuit-like outfit. Wait, Deku? Is that your name? Yeah, Izuku said, scratching his cheek. A nickname, mostly. Kaken, the one who's always yelling? Yeah, him. He's called me that since we were kids. It means, useless. Oh, Uraraka said, looking horrified. But then her expression changed. You know, I actually really like it. Deku sounds like the Japanese word for you can do it. It sounds like a hero's name, Deku. A hero's name. The simple reframing of a name that had been a brand of shame his entire life struck him with surprising force. It felt right. I'm Deku then, he said with a newfound determination. All Might began drawing the lots. The first teams to fight will be these guys. He pulled out 2 balls. Team A, the heroes, Izuku Midoriya and Achiko Uraraka, and Team D, the villains, Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. A cold silence fell over the group. The tension was electric. Izuku looked over at Bakugo. The explosive teen was trembling, a wide, terrifying grin plastered on his face. It wasn't a smile of confidence. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. This wasn't a training exercise for him. This was a hunt. Inside the building, Uraraka was nervous. Bakugo-kun is really intense. He seems to have it out for you, Deku-kun. Do you have a plan? Izuku nodded, his mind already a whirlwind of strategy and analysis. He was no longer the anxious boy from the sludge villain incident. He was a tactician. Kaken's primary attack is his right hook. He's more agile than he looks, but he always starts with his right. He's impatient and will almost certainly come straight for me, ignoring you. He'll see this as a one-on-one fight. Ida will be the one guarding the weapon. He's fast, but only in a straight line. His turning is his weakness. He looked at Uraraka. Here's the plan. I'll draw Kaken's attention. I'll keep him busy. While I do, you need to find the weapon. Avoid Ida if you can. Your job is reconnaissance and, if you get the chance, securing the objective. Can you do that? Uraraka looked at his calm, determined face and felt her own nerves settle. He was treating her like a partner, a capable hero. She nodded firmly. Got it. All right, hero team. Infiltrate. All Might's voice boomed through their earpieces. They entered the building, a maze of sterile corridors and concrete pillars. Izuku's senses were on high alert. He could feel the vibrations in the floor, hear the faint hum of the building's power. Full cal 5%. A soft green-gold aura enveloped him. The world slowed down just a fraction. He could perceive every dust mote floating in the air, every distant sound. They rounded a corner, and Izuku's eyes widened. A flicker of movement. The faint click of a metal pin. Get down! He yelled, grabbing Uraraka and pulling her back. An explosion ripped through the corridor where they had been standing, blasting a hole in the wall. Bakugo emerged from the smoke, his face a mask of fury. Come out and face me, Deku! He roared. You fucking coward! Izuku pushed Uraraka towards an adjacent hallway. Go! Now! She didn't hesitate, trusting his plan. Izuku stepped out to face his rival. For Bakugo, this was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment to reassert the natural order. He lunged, his right hand crackling with explosive power. Just like I predicted, Izuku thought. Time seemed to warp. From Izuku's perspective, Bakugo was moving in slow motion. He could see the muscles in his arm tensing, see the sweat beading on his brow, see the chemical reaction of nitroglycerin beginning to spark in his palm. It was all so slow. He sidestepped the explosive punch with an almost casual grace. The blast scorched the wall behind him. Bakugo overextended, and Izuku was already behind him. "You're too slow, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice calm. Bakugo roared in frustration and spun, launching a series of rapid-fire explosions. Izuku became a phantom in green lightning, dancing between the detonations. He flowed around the attacks, never more than an inch from the blast's radius, but never touched. The explosions bloomed in his wake, scorching the walls and floor, but his costume remained pristine. In the observation room, the other students were in awe. "Holy crap! Bakugo can't even touch him!" Kirishima exclaimed. "Midoriya is completely controlling the flow of this battle," Momo Yayorozu observed, her analytical mind whirring. "He's not attacking. He's just evading. He's making Bakugo waste energy." Izuku led Bakugo on a chase through the building, a whirlwind of explosions and green light. As he moved, he was mapping the building in his head, feeding Uraraka information through his comms. "4th floor, northeast corner. Ida is guarding it. He's cleared the room of all objects to give himself a clear running field." "Got it, Deku-kun!" Her voice came back, a little breathless. The chase was taking its toll on Bakugo. He was panting, his movements growing sloppier, more desperate. "Stand still and fight me, you damn nerd!" he screamed. Izuku skidded to a halt in a large, open room filled with support pillars. He knew this had to end. And he knew, with a sinking feeling, that he couldn't win by fighting back. Even a 5% punch, delivered with his speed, would feel like being hit by a car. It would break bones. A 10% punch could be lethal. He was holding back a hurricane, trying to use it as a gentle breeze. This was his first true test as a hero, not just to win, but to win without destroying his opponent. "I'm not going to fight you, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice echoing in the large room. "This is an exercise. Our goal is to secure the weapon. Don't you lecture me." Bakugo raised his gauntlets, a menacing grin on his face. "You know what these do, Deku? They store my sweat. And now, they're full." In the control room, All Might's voice boomed. "Young Bakugo, don't! You'll kill him! He won't die if he dodges!" Bakugo yelled, pulling the pin. A torrent of blinding light and concussive force erupted from the gauntlet. It wasn't an explosion. It was a focused, building-destroying beam of destruction. It vaporized the pillar Izuku had been standing near and blasted a massive hole in the side of the building. The students in the observation room screamed. All Might gripped his console, his knuckles white. But when the smoke cleared, Izuku was standing 20 feet to the left, his costume singed, but otherwise unharmed. His ears were ringing, but he was safe. He had seen the attack coming an eternity before it was launched. He looked at the gaping hole in the building, then back at Bakugo. His calm finally broke. "Are you crazy?" he shouted. "You could have brought the whole building down. Uraraka and Ida are still in here. Shut up!" Bakugo roared, his body shaking with the recoil and pure adrenaline. He aimed his other gauntlet, but his arms were trembling too much. He abandoned it, and blasted himself forward for one final, desperate attack. He flew through the air, right hand crackling, left hand ready to propel him in a spin. His ultimate move, the howitzer impact. This, Izuku knew, he couldn't just dodge. The resulting explosion would be too large, too destructive. He had to meet it. Full cowl, 15%. His aura exploded outwards. He didn't run away from the attack. He ran at it. He started running in a tight circle in the direct path of Bakugo's aerial assault. Faster and faster he ran, a blur of green and gold. A powerful cyclone of wind erupted around him, a swirling vortex of air pressure that met Bakugo's charge head-on. The explosion collided with the man-made tornado. The result was a stunning display of physics. The vortex caught the blast, buffering it, containing it, and redirecting its force upwards. The ceiling of the room imploded, showering the floor with concrete, but the main structural integrity of the building held. The blast went up, not out. Bakugo was thrown back, landing hard, his ears ringing, his vision swimming. The feedback from having his ultimate move contained and redirected was disorienting. In that moment of confusion, Izuku spoke into his calm. "Uraraka-san!" Now, upstairs, Ida had heard the massive explosion and was distracted, looking towards the source of the sound. In that split second, Uraraka made her move, using her quirk on a pillar fragment, and swinging it to create a cloud of debris. While Ida was blinded, Izuku acted. He didn't run up the stairs. He didn't bother with doors. He chose the most direct path. He looked at the floor beneath him, calculated the location of the bomb room directly above, and vibrated his entire body. He phased. The world became a ghostly, non-solid realm of gray and static. He shot upwards, passing through concrete and rebar like a ghost, emerging from the floor of the bomb room behind a stunned Tenya Ida. He didn't attack. He didn't even make a sound. He simply ran past the frozen villain in training, phased his hand through the wall behind the papier-mâché weapon, and solidified it just enough to touch the device. "Hero Team wins!" All Might's voice, filled with shock and relief, echoed through the building. The exercise was over. Izuku stood, his aura fading, his breathing steady. He had neutralized a vastly superior offensive opponent, protected his teammate, and secured the objective with almost zero collateral damage, all without throwing a single punch. Back in the observation room, the students were silent. Momo Yaoyorozu finally broke the silence, her voice filled with analytical awe. "It was perfect. Tactically perfect." He assessed his opponent's psychological state, controlled the battlefield to minimize damage, used his own abilities for defense and misdirection, and coordinated with his partner to achieve the objective in the most efficient way possible. He never once went on the offensive. Shoto Todoroki, who had been watching impassively, had a flicker of something new in his eyes. Interest. All Might declared the MVP of the match was not Uraraka for her quick thinking, nor Ida for playing his role perfectly. It was Izuku Midoriya. Later, as the teams gathered, Aizawa appeared beside All Might, having watched the entire thing from the shadows. He looked at Izuku, his gaze sharp and critical. "Perfect execution, Midoriya," he said, his voice flat. The class was surprised by the praise. But then he continued. "But a hero who is afraid to strike is a hero who hesitates. You had a dozen openings to end that fight with a single blow, and chose not to. Today, it was the right choice. But one day, you will face a villain where incapacitation is the only option, and in that moment, hesitation gets people killed. Yours, or someone else's. Remember that." The words hit Izuku harder than any of Bakugo's explosions. He had won. But his teacher was right. He had felt the immense, terrifying weight of his power. The desperate need to hold back. He looked over at Bakugo, who was being tended to by medics, his face a hollow mask of shattered pride. He had won the battle. But the war for control, both of his power and his own heroic identity, had only just begun.